The clock on the wall read 10:47 p.m. when Maya finally set down the last tray. Her feet ached in a way that made her wonder if she'd ever known what it felt like to not be tired. 3 years of this. 3 years of double shifts, fake smiles, and the constant smell of garlic and tomato sauce that never quite washed out of her hair. Giovanni's was the kind of restaurant that tried hard to be fancy. White tablecloths, dim lighting, candles on every table. The kind of place where people celebrated anniversaries and closed business deals. Maya had served hundreds of these meals, watched countless proposals, poured wine for more birthday celebrations than she could count. She was good at her job. Really good. The kind of good that came from necessity rather than passion. She grabbed the spray bottle and a clean cloth, moving through the dining room with practiced efficiency. Table 7 still had breadcrumbs scattered across it. Table 12 needed the salt shaker refilled. These small details mattered to Mr. Giovanni, the owner who still worked the kitchen most nights despite his gray hair and the way his hands shook when he was tired. As she worked, Maya's eyes kept drifting to the corner of the room. The piano sat there like an old friend she'd been avoiding. It was an upright, nothing special, probably 50 years old with scratches on the bench and keys that had yellowed with age. Most customers barely noticed it. On Friday and Saturday nights, Mr. Giovanni hired someone to play background music. Jazz standards mostly. The kind of pleasant, forgettable melodies that made people feel sophisticated while they ate their pasta. Maya had been walking past that piano for 3 years. Every single shift. Sometimes her fingers would twitch when she looked at it. Muscle memory firing in ways she couldn't control. She'd catch herself and shove her hands into her apron pockets, focusing on anything else. Because looking at that piano hurt in a way that was hard to explain to anyone who hadn't lost something they loved. She finished wiping down the last table and checked the time again. Almost 11. Her bus would come at 11:23, which gave her just enough time to cash out her tips and grab her jacket from the back. It had been a decent night. Maybe 200 in tips, which meant she could finally get her phone screen fixed. The crack across the middle had been spreading for weeks. In the kitchen, Mr. Giovanni was still there, supervising the cleanup. He looked exhausted, but he always stayed until the last pot was washed. It was his way. He'd owned this restaurant for 32 years, raised 3 kids on the money it brought in, put them all through college. "Good work tonight, Maya," he said, his Italian accent still thick even after all his years in America. That party of 8, they left happy. I saw them laughing, Maya smiled. They were celebrating a retirement. 50 years with the same company. 50 years, Mr. Giovanni repeated, shaking his head. That's loyalty. You don't see that much anymore. Maya didn't mention that she'd been at Giovanni's for 3 years and it felt like 50. That wasn't the kind of thing you said to your boss, especially when he was kind and paid fair wages and let you take home leftover bread at the end of the night. She collected her tips from the register, signed out, and headed to the small closet that served as a break room. Her jacket hung on its usual hook, next to the schedule for next week. She glanced at it out of habit. 5 shifts, all doubles. Her day off was Wednesday, which meant she'd have exactly 1 day to do laundry, buy groceries, and try to remember what it felt like to be a person instead of just a waitress. But that wasn't fair, was it? Being a waitress was being a person. It was honest work. Important work. Someone had to serve the food, refill the water glasses, make sure people had a nice evening. There was dignity in that, even if her back disagreed every morning when she tried to get out of bed. The thing was, Maya hadn't always been a waitress. There had been a before, a time when her hands had been smooth, when her feet hadn't ached, when she'd spent her days in practice rooms and her nights studying music theory until the notes swam before her eyes. She'd been good. Really good. Good enough to get into one of the best music schools in the country. Good enough to earn a partial scholarship. Good enough that her professors had started talking about competitions and concert halls and a future that stretched out bright and promising. That was 4 years ago. A lifetime ago, really. Before her dad got sick. Before the medical bills started piling up like snow in winter. Endless and suffocating. Before she'd made the calculation that every college student fears. How much does a dream cost measured against someone's life? The answer had been simple, even if it broke her heart. She'd left school with just 1 semester remaining. Came back home. Found the best-paying job she could without a degree. Giovanni's had been hiring, And Mr. Giovanni hadn't asked too many questions about the gap on her resume where it said she'd gone to music school. That first night, she'd seen the piano and felt something crack open inside her chest. But she'd kept walking, kept working, because that's what you did when you were 25 and your dad needed treatment and the bills were due, whether you felt sad about it or not. Her dad was better now. The treatment had worked, which the doctor said was something close to a miracle. He was back at work part-time, managing a hardware store on the east side of town. They still had debt, mountains of it, but they had a payment plan. It was manageable. Barely, but manageable. And yet Maya kept working at Giovanni's, kept walking past that piano, kept her hands busy with trays and dishes and wine bottles, anything to stop them from remembering what they used to do. Sometimes late at night when she couldn't sleep, she'd lie in her tiny apartment and move her fingers against the blanket, playing silent songs that only she could hear. She'd work through the piece she'd been composing during her last semester, the one she'd never finished, never performed for anyone. It lived only in her head now, growing and changing, becoming something she'd never be able to play because she'd never be able to afford to go back and finish her degree. That ship had sailed. She was 28 now, too old to be a student again, too tired to dream about concert halls. Maya pulled on her jacket and grabbed her bag. The restaurant was quiet now, just the sound of dishes being washed in the kitchen. She called out a goodbye to Mr. Giovanni and pushed through the front door into the cool night air. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. She walked slowly, in no particular hurry. Above her, the Seattle sky was doing that thing where you couldn't tell if it was cloudy or clear. Just a general grayness that matched her mood. Her phone buzzed. A text from her dad asking if she'd gotten off work okay, reminding her to be safe. She smiled and texted back a quick, "Yes, on my way home now," with a heart emoji. Tomorrow she'd do it all again, and the day after that, and the day after that. That was life, wasn't it? You kept going. You paid your bills. You took care of the people you loved. You put one foot in front of the other until enough time passed that you forgot you'd ever wanted anything different. But sometimes, just sometimes, when she walked past that piano, her fingers would remember, and for just a moment she'd let herself feel it. The loss, the longing, the music that still lived inside her waiting. Tuesday started like any other day. Maya's alarm went off at 2:30 p.m., which most people would think was sleeping in. But for someone who worked until midnight, it was basically dawn. She lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the water stain on her ceiling that looked like a map of Italy. Funny considering where she worked. Her apartment was small, studio really, with a kitchen area that was more of a suggestion than an actual room. But it was hers, and the rent was only slightly unreasonable instead of completely insane, which in Seattle meant she'd hit the jackpot. She could walk to the bus stop in 5 minutes, and her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, sometimes left dumplings by her door when she made too many. Maya showered, dressed in her black pants and white button-up shirt, the unofficial uniform of waitstaff everywhere. She braided her hair back tight, applied minimal makeup, grabbed her apron from where it hung on the bathroom door. By 3:45 she was out the door. The afternoon shift at Giovanni's was usually quieter. A few early birds who liked to eat dinner at 4 o'clock, some business meetings over coffee and dessert, the occasional tourist who'd read about the restaurant online. Maya preferred these shifts. Less chaos, more time to actually talk to customers instead of just rushing from table to table. She pushed through the front door at 3:58, 2 minutes early like always. Mr. Giovanni was already there, of course arranging flowers on the host stand. He looked up and frowned. "Maya, good, you're here. We have a problem." Her stomach dropped. Problems at work usually meant someone called in sick and she'd have to cover extra tables, or the dishwasher broke again, or they were out of something crucial, and she'd have to explain to disappointed customers why they couldn't have the special. "What's wrong?" Mr. Giovanni set down the flowers and rubbed his face with both hands. Robert called. "The piano player. He's sick, some flu thing, he can barely talk. And we have reservations tonight. Full house, including..." He paused, lowered his voice even though they were alone, including that food critic. "You know the one from the newspaper. She made a reservation 3 weeks ago." Maya felt a chill run through her. Every restaurant owner in the city knew about this particular critic. Her reviews could make or break a place. A good review meant lines out the door for months. A bad one meant empty tables and eventually a closed sign on the window. "Can you call another pianist?" Maya asked. "I tried. Everyone I know is booked or out of town. It's Tuesday. Nobody keeps Tuesday open." Mr. Giovanni looked genuinely distressed. His restaurant was his life. Maya knew he'd mortgaged his house twice to keep this place running during the slow years. They stood there for a moment, both thinking. The afternoon light coming through the windows made everything look golden and peaceful, which felt wrong given the panic in Mr. Giovanni's eyes. "I could call around to some music schools," Maya offered. "Maybe a student would want to make some money." "There's no time. The critic's reservation is at 6:30. It's already 4 o'clock. He ran his hand through his gray hair, making it stick up in odd angles. Then he looked at Maya, really looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Wait, you went to music school, yes? You mentioned it once. You played piano?" Maya's heart started beating faster. "That was a long time ago. But you can play? Just simple things? Background music? Nothing fancy, just something so the restaurant doesn't feel empty and quiet?" She wanted to say no. Wanted to make up an excuse. Say her hands were out of practice, that she'd forgotten everything, that it had been too many years. But Mr. Giovanni was looking at her with such hope, and she remembered how he'd hired her without a degree, how he'd given her extra shifts when her dad's bills were worst, how he never complained when she had to leave early for a doctor's appointment. "I can play," she heard herself say. The relief on his face was immediate. "Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Just for tonight. Just a few songs, very quiet in the background. Nobody will even really listen. They'll be focused on their food, their conversations. You just make the room feel nice, yes?" She nodded, even though her hands were already starting to shake. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Maya set up her section, filled salt and pepper shakers, folded napkins into the fancy shape Mr. Giovanni liked. The whole time she was hyper-aware of the piano in the corner. It seemed bigger somehow, more present, like it was watching her. At 6 o'clock, the first customers arrived. An elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. Maya seated them, brought water and bread, took their order. Her movements were automatic, her mind somewhere else entirely. By 6:15, the restaurant was filling up. The sounds of conversation and clinking silverware created that pleasant buzz that meant people were having a good time. And then she saw them. A woman in her 50s, well-dressed, sitting alone at table 9. She had a notebook. The food critic had arrived early. Mr. Giovanni caught Maya's eye from across the room and gestured toward the piano. It was time. Maya's legs felt strange as she walked toward the corner. The piano bench was exactly as she remembered it, worn smooth from years of people sitting down. She adjusted the height slightly, positioned herself, looked down at the keys. They were just keys, ivory and black, some of them chipped, showing their age. But to Maya, they might as well have been made of fire. She hadn't touched a piano in 3 years. 3 years of walking past this instrument, of keeping her distance, of pretending that part of her life was over. She placed her hands on the keys and felt everything rush back. The weight of them, the slight resistance before they pressed down, the way they were cool against her fingertips. Muscle memory is a strange thing. Her fingers found their positions automatically without her having to think about it. Maya started with something safe, a simple jazz standard, the kind Robert usually played. Autumn Leaves, slow and gentle, barely louder than the conversations happening around her. Her fingers were stiff at first, uncertain. She hit a wrong note and winced, but nobody seemed to notice. She kept going, and then something started to happen. Her fingers loosened up. They remembered how to move, how to stretch, how to find the notes without her having to look. The song flowed more easily. She finished Autumn Leaves and transitioned into another standard, then another. By the third song, Maya realized she'd closed her eyes. When had that happened? She opened them quickly, worried someone might think it was weird, but nobody was paying attention to her. They were eating, talking, laughing. Just like Mr. Giovanni said, the piano was just background, just atmosphere, except it wasn't. Not for Maya. With each song, she felt something loosening inside her chest, something that had been locked up tight for 3 years. The music wasn't just coming from her fingers anymore. It was coming from somewhere deeper, some place she'd tried to board up and forget about. She played through 2 more standards and then her fingers started to drift. They found different notes, a different melody, something that wasn't a jazz standard at all, something that came from her memory, from those late nights in her apartment when she played silent songs against her blanket. It was the piece she'd been composing in her last semester, the one she'd never finished, never performed. Her fingers found it like coming home, like muscle memory that went soul deep. Maya's heart started pounding. She should stop. Should go back to the safe songs, the forgettable background music, but her hands wouldn't listen. They kept playing, finding notes she didn't know she still remembered, building something that was bigger than just pleasant dinner music. The composition was slow at first, contemplative, but it had more to it. She could feel where it wanted to go, how it needed to build and grow and become something powerful. Her practical brain was screaming at her to stop. This wasn't what Mr. Giovanni asked for. This wasn't background music. This was something else entirely. But for the first time in 3 years, Maya wasn't listening to her practical brain. She was listening to her hands, to the music, to that part of herself she thought had died. She let her eyes close again. And she let herself play. The music changed and Maya changed with it. Her fingers moved across the keys with a confidence she'd forgotten she had. The piece she'd composed 4 years ago was coming back to her in waves, like memories surfacing after being underwater too long. But it wasn't exactly the same as she'd written it. 3 years of life had changed it somehow. The melody was sadder now, deeper, like it understood things it hadn't before. She played through the opening section, the part that was supposed to sound like early morning, like hope, like possibility. Her left hand held the foundation steady, while her right hand danced through the melody. The notes came faster now. She wasn't thinking anymore, just feeling. Just letting her hands remember what they'd always known. And then she hit the transition, the part where the piece was supposed to shift from gentle to something more urgent. When she'd first written it back in school, she'd struggled with this section. It had felt forced, like she was trying too hard to be dramatic. But now, sitting here in this restaurant with 3 years of exhausted nights and aching feet and dreams deferred, the transition felt natural, obvious even. The music grew louder, not inappropriately loud, but present, undeniable. Maya's whole body moved with it now, swaying slightly, her shoulders rising and falling with the dynamics of the piece. She could feel the emotion pouring through her fingers into the keys, all the frustration of working double shifts, all the fear from her father's illness, all the grief of leaving school, all the quiet, persistent hope that maybe, just maybe, life could still surprise you. She didn't notice when the first conversation stopped. A couple at table 5 had been discussing their vacation plans, trying to decide between Hawaii and Mexico. The woman stopped mid-sentence, her hand frozen halfway to her wine glass. She turned toward the piano, her eyes wide. Maya didn't see it. She was somewhere else entirely, lost in the music. At table 7, a business dinner was happening. 3 people in suits closing some kind of deal. Papers spread across the table next to their pasta. The man who'd been talking about quarterly projections trailed off. All 3 of them turned to look. The piece was building now, growing more complex. Maya's hands flew across the keys, her fingers finding chords she'd practiced 1,000 times in another life. The melody soared up high, then plunged down low, then twisted around itself in ways that shouldn't work but somehow did. More conversations stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. In the kitchen, the line cook heard the music change. He looked up from the risotto he was stirring, confused. That didn't sound like Robert's playing. That didn't sound like background music at all. He walked to the kitchen door and peered out. Mr. Giovanni was standing near the host stand, frozen, his mouth slightly open. He'd asked for simple background music. This was not that. The food critic at table 9 set down her pen. She'd been making notes about the bread, which was good but not exceptional. Now she wasn't thinking about bread at all. She was leaning forward in her chair, completely focused on the woman at the piano. Maya reached the climax of the piece, the part where everything came together. Both hands were working now in perfect coordination, creating layers of sound that filled the entire restaurant. The music was powerful here, almost overwhelming. It demanded to be heard. It demanded to be felt. Her eyes were still closed. She had no idea that every single person in the restaurant was watching her now. The elderly couple at table 3. The family with 2 young children at table 6. The businessman who'd been on his phone. Everyone had stopped whatever they were doing. Even the children were quiet. The piece thundered toward its peak. Maya's hands were moving so fast they were almost a blur. The old piano, which usually just produced pleasant background noise, was singing. Actually singing. Notes bounced off the walls, filled every corner, made the wine glasses vibrate slightly on the tables. And then, just when it seemed like the music couldn't get any bigger, Maya pulled it back. Her hands slowed. The volume dropped. The melody that had been so urgent and powerful became gentle again, almost fragile, like someone crying after screaming, like exhaustion after a long fight, like peace after chaos. This was the part she'd never finished. Back in school, she'd gotten this far and then stopped, unsure how to end it. But now, right now, her hands knew exactly what to do. The ending wrote itself through her fingers. The melody became simpler, more pure. It was the same theme from the beginning, but transformed. Sadder, yes, but also wiser. More beautiful, because it understood pain. The notes fell like autumn leaves, gentle and inevitable. Maya played the final chord and let it ring out, her foot on the sustain pedal, letting the sound fade naturally into silence. She took a breath, opened her eyes, lifted her hands from the keys, and heard nothing. Complete silence. For a moment, Maya thought maybe she'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe she'd been playing in her head, and her hands had just been moving silently over the keys. Maybe she'd had some kind of episode, dissociated from reality, and everyone was staring at her because she'd been sitting at the piano not making any sound at all. Then someone started clapping. It was the elderly man from table 3, the one celebrating his anniversary. He was standing up, applauding, his face wet with tears. His wife stood up too, clapping so hard her bracelets jangled. Then everyone else started. The whole restaurant erupted into applause. Not polite golf claps. Real applause. Enthusiastic, genuine, shocked applause. Maya looked around the dining room and saw faces she'd served for 3 years looking at her like they'd never seen her before, which she supposed they hadn't. Not really. They'd seen Maya, the waitress. Maya who refilled water glasses and recommended the special. Not Maya who could do this. Her face flushed hot. She stood up from the piano bench quickly, awkwardly, nearly knocking it over. Her instinct was to run, to hide, to go back to being invisible. But people were still clapping, and now some of them were standing. Mr. Giovanni was making his way toward her through the tables, his expression unreadable. Maya's stomach dropped. She'd messed up. He'd asked for background music, and she'd made a scene. The food critic was probably writing a scathing review right now about the restaurant with the attention-seeking waitress who couldn't follow simple instructions. But when Mr. Giovanni reached her, he wasn't angry. His eyes were shining. "Madonna," he whispered. "Maya, I had no idea. How did I not know?" She didn't know what to say. "Sorry? Thank you? It just happened?" Before she could respond, someone else was approaching, the food critic. Maya recognized her from the photos that ran with her restaurant reviews. Up close, she was smaller than Maya expected, with gray hair cut short and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Excuse me," the woman said. Her voice was clear, precise. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to know. Are you a professional musician? Do you perform anywhere else?" Maya shook her head, finding her voice finally. "No, I'm not. I mean, I'm not a musician. I work here. I'm a waitress." The critic looked at her for a long moment. "You're not just a waitress," she said quietly. Then louder, "What you just played, that was original, wasn't it? Your own composition?" "Yes. I mean, mostly. It's not finished. I wrote it a long time ago and never—" Maya stopped, unsure how to explain. But the critic wasn't listening anymore. She was pulling out her phone, typing something quickly. "What's your name?" "Maya. Maya Peterson." More typing. Then the woman looked up. "I'm not going to write about the food tonight. I'm going to write about you, about what I just heard. Is that okay?" Maya's mind was spinning. Nothing about this made sense. 5 minutes ago, she'd been a waitress trying to help out her boss. Now a food critic was asking permission to write about her? "I don't understand," Maya said, Someone else was approaching now. A man in an expensive suit, probably in his 40s, with the kind of confidence that came from money and success. He'd been sitting at table 11. She remembered serving him earlier. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, directing his words at Maya. "My name is David Chen. I'm a concert promoter here in Seattle. I work with the Symphony, some of the smaller venues around the city." He handed her a business card. "What I just heard, that was extraordinary. Truly extraordinary. Have you ever thought about performing professionally?" Maya looked down at the card in her hand. It felt surreal. Like she'd fallen through a hole in reality into some parallel universe where waitresses became concert pianists just by playing one song. "I can't," she heard herself say. "I don't have a degree. I left school before I finished." David Chen smiled. "A degree is just paper. What you have, what I just heard, that's rare. That's real talent. Will you at least think about it? I'm organizing a new performance series. Unconventional artists, unexpected venues. I'd love to have you audition." The restaurant had gone back to its normal volume now, conversations resuming, but Maya could feel people still looking at her. Mr. Giovanni was beaming like a proud father. The critic was still typing on her phone. This stranger was offering her opportunities that felt impossible. Maya's hands were shaking. She looked down at them, these hands that carried plates and wiped tables and somehow, impossibly, still remembered how to make music that made people cry. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll think about it." But even as she said it, she knew thinking about it wasn't the question anymore. The question was what came next, now that the door she'd thought was closed forever had suddenly swung wide open. Maya didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, David Chen's business card on her nightstand catching the streetlight from outside. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces in the restaurant, the way they'd looked at her, like she was someone different, someone important. Her phone buzzed around 2 in the morning. A text from Mr. Giovanni. The critic posted something online already. You should see it. With shaking hands, Maya opened her browser and searched. The article was right there, posted just 20 minutes ago. The headline read, "Forget the food. The real story at Giovanni's is the waitress who plays like an angel." Maya read it 3 times. The critic described the evening in detail, the way the restaurant had fallen silent, how grown men had cried. She called Maya's playing raw and technically masterful, and the kind of authentic artistry that reminds us why music matters. The article ended with a question. Why is this woman serving pasta when she should be filling concert halls? By morning, Maya's phone was exploding. Friend requests on social media from people she'd never met. Comments and shares on the article. Someone had recorded part of her performance on their phone and posted it online. The video was grainy and the sound wasn't great, but there she was, lost in the music, completely unaware she was being filmed. The video had 12,000 views already. Maya sat on her bed in her pajamas scrolling through comments from strangers. Who is this woman? I got chills watching this. This is what real talent looks like. Seattle, go support this artist. It felt surreal. Yesterday she'd been invisible. Today people across the city were talking about her. Her phone rang. An unknown number. Maya almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Hi, is this Maya Peterson? This is Rachel Kim from King 5 News. We'd love to do a story about you. Would you be available for an interview? A TV interview? Maya's mind went blank. I need to think about it. Of course. Here's my number. Call me anytime. 3 more calls came in the next hour. A local radio station, a podcast about artists in Seattle, another newspaper wanting to do a longer profile. Maya stopped answering and just let the phone ring. This was too much. Too fast. Yesterday she'd just been trying to help her boss. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen, but underneath the panic, there was something else, something that felt suspiciously like excitement. At 3 p.m., Maya got ready for her shift at Giovanni's. She put on her uniform, braided her hair, grabbed her apron. Everything normal. Everything the same as it had been for 3 years. Except nothing was the same at all. When she walked into the restaurant, she immediately knew something was different. There was a line outside. An actual line. People waiting to get in. On a Wednesday, Mr. Giovanni saw her and rushed over, his face flushed with excitement. "Maya, look at this. We're fully booked tonight. Completely full. And people are calling asking if you're going to play again." Maya felt her stomach flip. "Mr. Giovanni, I can't. I have to work my tables." He waved his hand dismissively. "I called in Tony to cover your section. Tonight you play. Please, Maya, these people, they came because of you." She looked around the restaurant. It was only 4 o'clock and already half the tables were full. She recognized some of the faces. The elderly couple from last night. They'd come back. And there were new people too, sitting with cameras and phones ready, clearly hoping to capture something special. "I don't know what to play," Maya said quietly. "Last night was it just happened." Mr. Giovanni put his hand on her shoulder. "Then let it happen again. Play what your heart tells you to play." So Maya sat at the piano. The restaurant fell quiet immediately, everyone watching, waiting. The pressure was enormous. Last night had been spontaneous, unexpected. Tonight everyone had expectations. Her hands found the keys and she started with something safe again. A jazz standard, but she could feel the disappointment in the room. That wasn't what they'd come for. Maya closed her eyes, took a breath and let go. She found her composition again, but this time she started from a different place. She let it grow slowly, building from something quiet and tentative into something bolder. The piece evolved as she played it, changing from what it had been last night, becoming something new. Music, Maya realized, wasn't a fixed thing. It was alive. It breathed and changed and grew depending on who was playing it and how they were feeling and who was listening. Last night's performance had been about surprise and release. Tonight was about courage and choice, about deciding to be seen. The music filled the restaurant again, and again people stopped eating. But this time Maya knew they were watching. This time she was playing for them, not just for herself, and that changed everything. When she finished, the applause was even louder than the night before. People were standing, cheering. Maya stood and took a small bow, her face burning. She caught Mr. Giovanni's eye and he was crying, actually crying, tears running down his weathered face. Over the next few days, things accelerated. The news segment aired. The video from that first night went viral, hitting 100,000 views, then 200,000. Maya's name was trending locally on social media. Musicians from around the city were reaching out, wanting to collaborate. The phone calls kept coming, and through it all, David Chen kept in touch. Gentle messages checking in, no pressure. "Just want you to know the offer stands whenever you're ready." Maya finally called him on Saturday morning. "I want to audition," she said. "For your performance series." "That's wonderful news." She could hear the smile in his voice. "When are you free?" They scheduled it for the following week. A small venue in Capitol Hill, informal. Just David and a few other people from the music community. Nothing too intimidating, he promised. But first, Maya needed to tell someone. She drove across town to her father's apartment, her hands gripping the steering wheel tight. He was in his garden when she arrived, tending to his tomato plants. The treatment had taken a lot from him, but he was here. He was alive. And that was everything. "Dad," Maya said, walking up behind him. He turned, saw her face, and immediately knew something was happening. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just need to tell you something." Maya sat down on his porch step. "You know how I've been working at the restaurant?" "Of course, and well, something happened this week. Something big." She told him everything. The sick pianist, the critic, the video, the concert promoter. Her father listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, "You gave up music school for me? Dad, don't let me finish." He sat down next to her. "You gave up your dream to take care of me. I've carried that guilt for 3 years, Maya. Every single day. Knowing what you sacrifice. You didn't ask me to do that, no, but you did it anyway. Because that's who you are," he took her hand. "But now you have a chance to go back. To do what you were meant to do. And if you don't take it, if you say no because you're scared or because you think you need to keep working to pay off medical bills that are my responsibility, not yours, I will never forgive myself." Maya felt tears burning in her eyes. I'm terrified. Good. That means it matters. He squeezed her hand. You know what the doctor told me when I was at my sickest? He said, we're not just trying to keep you alive. We're trying to give you life worth living. That stuck with me. Life worth living, Maya, that's not just for me. That's for you, too. She leaned her head on his shoulder like she'd done when she was little. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? Then you fail, and then you try again. But at least you tried. At least you didn't spend the rest of your life wondering what if. He kissed the top of her head. I'm so proud of you. Not because you're talented, though you are. I'm proud because you're brave enough to try again after life knocked you down. Maya stayed there for a long time, sitting on the porch with her father, watching the afternoon light fade. His tomato plants swayed in the breeze. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. Everything was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. When she finally drove home, Maya felt different, lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying something heavy for 3 years and had finally set it down. The audition was in 5 days. She had a lot of work to do. Her fingers were out of shape, her technique rusty. But for the first time since she'd left school, Maya let herself feel something she'd been too afraid to feel. Hope. She pulled David Chen's business card from her wallet and looked at it one more time. Then she went to her laptop and started practicing, really practicing the way she used to. Her tiny apartment filled with music, imperfect and beautiful and real. Outside her window, the Seattle sky was doing its usual gray thing. But to Maya, everything looked brighter. The audition was on a Thursday evening at a small venue called the Blue Note, tucked away in Capitol Hill. Maya had passed it 100 times on the bus and never gone inside. Now she stood at the entrance, her hands sweating, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She'd spent the past 5 days practicing until her fingers ached. Her tiny apartment had become a music studio again. Sheets of composition paper scattered across her kitchen table. Her old music theory textbooks pulled from storage. It felt like being back in school, except better somehow. Because this time she was choosing it. This time she wasn't doing it because she had to, but because she wanted to. David Chen met her at the door. Maya, welcome, come on in. It's just a few people, very casual. Think of it like playing at the restaurant, but with better acoustics. Inside, the venue was intimate. Maybe 50 seats, most of them empty. There was a beautiful grand piano on a small stage, spotlit. 5 people sat scattered in the first few rows. David introduced them quickly. A woman who ran a local arts foundation. A man who booked talent for various venues around the city. A music professor from the university. A few others whose names Maya immediately forgot because her brain was too busy panicking. Whenever you're ready, David said gently. No pressure. Just play what you want to play. Maya walked to the piano. The stage felt enormous even though it was small. She sat down, adjusted the bench, looked at the keys. They were perfect. Clean, perfectly tuned, responsive. This wasn't the old upright at Giovanni's. This was a real instrument. She placed her hands on the keys and felt that familiar flutter of fear and excitement. Then she started to play. Maya had decided to perform her complete composition, the one she'd started 4 years ago and finally finished during her practice sessions this week. It was roughly 12 minutes long, a journey through everything she'd felt over the past few years. The beginning was still hopeful, still innocent. But now it moved through struggle and pain and exhaustion, and at the end, instead of just fading away, sad and unfinished, it found resolution. Not a happy ending exactly, but an acceptance. A peace with the journey. As she played, Maya forgot about the people watching. She forgot about the audition, the pressure, the what-ifs. She just played. Her fingers flew across the keys, her body swaying with the music. This was why she'd fallen in love with piano in the first place. This feeling, this absolute presence in a moment where nothing else existed except the music and the person creating it. When she finished, there was that familiar pause, that breath of silence. Then the small audience erupted. The music professor was wiping her eyes. David was grinning. The woman from the Arts Foundation was already typing notes on her phone. Maya stood, took a bow, walked off the stage on shaky legs. David met her at the bottom of the stairs. That was incredible. Even better than at the restaurant. Maya, I'd love to offer you a spot in the series. 3 performances over the next 3 months. We'll market it, get press coverage, build your audience. What do you think? Yes, Maya said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. David's team handled most of the logistics, but Maya had decisions to make. What else to perform besides her own composition? How to present herself? What to say if there were interviews? And there were interviews. Local media was still interested in the waitress-turned-pianist story. Maya did a radio segment where she talked about leaving school and the moment at the restaurant that changed everything. She did a podcast interview about the relationship between survival and art. She even did another TV appearance, this time playing a short piece live in the studio. Through it all, she kept working at Giovanni's. Not full-time anymore, just 3 nights a week. Mr. Giovanni had insisted she cut back her hours to focus on music, but Maya couldn't quite bring herself to leave completely. The restaurant had been her home for 3 years. These people had seen her through her hardest times, plus if everything fell apart, she needed to know she had something to fall back on. That practical part of her brain hadn't completely shut off. Her first official performance was scheduled for a Friday night in mid-November. The venue held 200 people. David warned her tickets were selling fast, but Maya tried not to think about it. 200 people was more than she'd ever played for in her life, even back in music school. The week before the performance, something unexpected happened. Maya got a call from her old music school. They'd seen the articles, watched the videos. The dean wanted to talk to her about finishing her degree. They could work something out, he said. Independent study portfolio assessment. They wanted her to graduate. Maya scheduled a meeting for the week after her performance, one step at a time. The night of the concert arrived cold and clear. Maya stood backstage in her one nice black dress, the one she usually wore to funerals and job interviews. Her hands were shaking. Through the curtain, she could hear the audience filing in, the murmur of conversation, the excitement in the air. David poked his head backstage. House is packed. We had to turn people away at the door. You ready? No, Maya said honestly. But I'm going anyway, he smiled. That's the spirit. You're going to be amazing. Just do what you did at the audition. Be yourself. Maya peeked through the curtain. The seats were full, every single one. And there in the third row she saw her father. Next to him was Mr. Giovanni and his wife. Behind them, she spotted some of her co-workers from the restaurant, the elderly couple who'd celebrated their anniversary the night everything changed, the food critic who'd written that first article. All these people who'd been part of her journey sitting together waiting to hear her play. Something settled in Maya's chest. A calmness she hadn't expected. These weren't strangers judging her. These were people who already knew her story, who'd already seen her at her most vulnerable, who were here because they believed in her. The lights dimmed. David walked out to introduce her. He kept it short, just the basics. A local artist making her concert debut. A journey from restaurant worker to performer. A story about second chances and the courage to try again. Please welcome Maya Peterson. Maya walked onto the stage. The spotlight was bright and warm. The applause washed over her like a wave. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, looked out at the audience. She could see their faces, expectant and kind. Thank you for being here, she said into the microphone David had set up. Her voice shook slightly. Some of you know my story. Some of you were there the night this all started. For those who don't know, I'm going to play something I wrote a long time ago and just recently finished. It's about losing something important and finding your way back to it. It's about the long road between giving up and trying again. She turned to the piano, placed her hands on the keys, took a breath, and then she played. The piece poured out of her. 12 minutes of everything she'd lived through. The audience was completely silent, completely focused. Maya could feel them with her, following the journey of the music. When she hit the difficult parts, she felt their tension. When the melody soared, she felt their joy. When it grew quiet and contemplative at the end, she felt them leaning in, not wanting to miss a single note. She played the final chord and let it ring out, fading slowly into silence. Then the room exploded. People were on their feet, applauding, cheering. Maya stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She saw her father stand up, clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. She saw Mr. Giovanni with his arm around his wife, both of them beaming. She saw strangers crying, smiling, celebrating this moment with her. Maya had spent 3 years convinced her story was over. that she'd made her choice and had to live with it. That dreams once deferred stayed deferred forever. But standing on that stage, looking out at those faces, she understood something new. Life wasn't a straight line. It wasn't about making one choice and sticking with it no matter what. It was about detours and unexpected turns, about doors that closed and different doors that opened, about having the courage to walk through them even when you were terrified. She performed 2 more pieces that night. By the end, her hands were tired but happy, that good kind of exhaustion that comes from doing something you love. Backstage afterward, there was a small celebration. Her father hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. Mr. Giovanni brought cannoli from the restaurant. David was already talking about the next performance, bigger venues, more opportunities. But the moment Maya would remember most came from the music professor who'd been at her audition. She was an older woman, probably in her 60s, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. "You know what's special about your playing?" she said to Maya quietly, away from the others. "It's not just technical skill, though you have that. It's that you've lived. You understand what it costs to make art. That suffering, that detour through ordinary life, that made you better, made your music mean something." Maya thought about that as she rode the bus home that night, exhausted and exhilarated. Maybe the 3 years at the restaurant hadn't been wasted after all. Maybe they'd been necessary. Maybe you had to lose yourself to find yourself. Maybe the long way around was actually the only way. She still worked at Giovanni's 2 nights a week. Still served pasta and poured wine and cleared tables. But now she also played concerts. Now she was finishing her degree. Now she was composing new pieces, performing around the city, building a life that included both the practical and the beautiful. The old upright piano at Giovanni's became Maya's warm-up spot. Before her shifts, she'd sit and play for a few minutes, and gradually it became a thing. People started timing their reservations to catch her pre-shift performances. That corner of the restaurant, once just background, became the heart of the place. Life, Maya learned, wasn't about choosing between dreams and responsibility. It was about finding a way to hold both, about being practical enough to survive and brave enough to try, about playing simple tunes when that's what the moment needed, and playing masterpieces when the moment was right. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, a simple tune could become a masterpiece. All you had to do was keep your hands on the keys and keep playing.